Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Deputy Chris Blin of the States of Guernsey, and we are going to take a look at current matters. As ever, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Tony.
And there we go. Now, uh, just one small point: new states, lots of hope, or same old, same old.
Well, there's a fresher feeling that there seems to be a more so cohesive interaction, but we have so many reforms and structural things that we need to do. We've had the honeymoon period, let's say the sort of the 100 sort of days. We need that discipline. We need to get the budget. We need a lot of changes to take place, and it all hinges on whether or not the electorate will support is going to be based on the coming this coming
Yeah,
events.
yeah. Okay. Meantime, you've been a busy gentleman, haven't you? Down to St. Helena for a conference. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so they nominated a place for Guernsey to join the what they call the sort of international observer mission. So when there is an election taking place in another either offshore territory, crown dependency, they have a team. So I was part of a team which consisted of a minister from Gibraltar, um, uh, a parliamentarian from Isle of Man, and from Westminster. So it's a team that goes there. It's a fascinating part of the work. So it's funded by Westminster. So this isn't coming from the cost of the local parliament.
Good.
And it's sure exactly. So I also start with that as a precedent. Um, and it means that we're out there to assess the elections to ensure everything is there. Now we had ex-deputy Salisbury who went for the UK elections, so it's something that happens, over the election periods. But what you see there is you engage with the stakeholders, you engage with government officers, with candidates. It's a fascinating time as well because you're all over the island. You're at the polling stations. You're there on the final day on the vote count. So from sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 6 o'clock in the morning, it's a really intense period. And at the same time, you engage with other parliamentarians. You see how other structures work, and above all, you build relationships with in my case, with the Isle of Man, talking about tax reform, Gibraltar, talking about parties. So it's a fascinating and a great opportunity. And Guernsey needs to remember we need those relationships. We're not like Southampton as a town, although we're much smaller. We have to remind ourselves we're an international state, and this is a key part.
Okay. Following on from that, you also got involved with a conference with the British Irish Assembly in Surrey, and that must have been quite fascinating. Does that represent both parts of Ireland?
Yes, it does. So it's again, I mean, just to give you a quick, really interesting sort of a viewpoint of that, BIPA or BIP, British Irish Parliament Assembly, was
Yeah.
originally formed in the 80s. Now, if we think back to the 80s, where we were with Ireland
The
and Britain,
Troubles. Yeah.
exactly. So you have to, if you kind of bear in mind, that's when those governments wouldn't even speak to each other. This is when it was first constituted, and it means that those parties sat in a room together, and that is a direct link to one of the results of the Good Friday Agreement. That when they were in a room, so this is highlighted to us many times. But when people get into a room together, this isn't memos and MOUs and letters, and it's actually face each other and do it. But now, of course, things have changed. There are still difficulties. I know we almost announced the new president for Ireland, but there are other changes. We had a guest speaker talking about the security from the Baltic Assembly, the president of the Baltic Assembly, Latvia, of which we have strong connections in the Channel Islands, Lithuania, and Estonia, talking about the inherent risks and the threats. And within the British Irish Assembly, of which Guernsey's on the steering committee, so that was another good plus point for our government. We also work on committees. So I work on a steering committee, and I also work on an AI committee, and on, of course, due to the role I've got over here with the wind farm, which means that I engaged with the Isle of Man, who are going through particular struggles. at this point, as well as the UK government, and again, a chance to influence, to build relationships, to talk about what we need as primary legislation we need to get our wind farm work going too.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting what you're saying about people being in the same room to actually get conversations going. I mean, you'll recall the Reverend Ian Paisley. Never, never, never. When it all happened, the assembly, he and Martin McGuinness were next to one another and were known as the Chuckle Brothers. So,
So,
you know, it's quite incredible from that point of view. Now, I also understand that you've got a meeting with Pedro Serrano, EU ambassador to the UK. That should be quite interesting.
that's right. So this takes place here. So again, it's not all about sort of interaction outside. He's on a short visit to Guernsey. I will be meeting him on the basis of as chair of the Offshore Delivery Board, which is the new name of the offshore wind group. It's engaging and giving him updates on what we are trying to achieve on the territorial waters, for whether it be the export of energy to France or to the UK. So it's a key opportunity for Mr. Serrano to be on Guernsey to meet with government officials and a flying whistle stop tour of the island.
Do you think the Crown dependencies have a better relationship with the EU than the UK does, bearing in mind that we weren't particularly involved with Brexit?
Well, we had no choice whatsoever in the matter.
Quite, yeah, yeah.
So you're spot on. Yes, we do. At least in my opinion, we do, because don't forget they're just off our shores with Normandy. We do relate to our king as
Mm.
not the Duke. Our Duke. We have 1,000 years. In fact, 2027 is going to be the 1,000th year of the birth of William the Conqueror, and there are going to be some huge events. I believe there's something coming out in the media, or there's something in the media this week about the events taking place, which will be across the whole of France, but also including the Channel Islands. We are directly involved in, look, when we think about things like ETA, which are the new electronic documents for passports to travel to France. We've had an exemption to allow the day trippers, which has been proven of the success of it by the summer we've had with the number of day trippers and visitors from France and elsewhere, but particularly from France. So yes, we have, and currently our government is engaging a lot more with France to try to build what we can. And I say post-Brexit, it's so long ago now. Now it's more of a case of how can our economies best work together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, interesting. Okay, let's get on to domestic matters. The budget. And I see that GPEG, the think tank, can't reconcile the figures. Uh, they reckon there's a general revenue deficit of 48 million against a cash outflow of 115 million. You don't have to be too bright to see that there's a little bit wrong with the credit card.
No, correct. And whether it be GPEG, I also saw a report from the Deputy Sloan. You probably read or saw that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
It was interesting having a committee's opinion on it. But it is fairly clear, we're in a situation now where we all know, I mean, even the funding for the projects, I think we've earmarked of the £1 billion of funding required. We have 150 million. It is clear that we are spending more, and yet we are still not working on a zero-based budget. We're still working on a kind of calculated model per committee. And something has to give. It is fairly obvious, like you just pointed out, our spending is extremely high. And until we demonstrate that we have the ability for the efficiencies and the savings, we're just putting ourselves in a deeper and deeper position. And the 2.5 million of savings, the onus seems to be all on the chief executive officer of the state of Guernsey. I mean, it seems to be that's where we're having the savings. But I know, and we know in business outside of government, that if you put the pressures on the committees to look at what their budgeting needs to be, because the model we take, we all know, is we take the existing, whether it be RPIX plus whatever requirements they are, and we understand, we know that that's come to over 26 million. of which it will not be possible to share it. And I'll say something else, Tony. Historically, um, if we were to say the budget, we would rather look at a zero-based budget or a cut of 1% or all the pragmatic ways of doing it. The answer will be, but we will damage essential services, core services, and we're going to be in a worse state. But generally, when you take that budget, and if you rather than saying what do I need more or how can I hold it, if we understand that there's less incomes on ETI, we have less tax revenues.
Mm.
So therefore, accordingly, we have to cut our cloth. It's an easy statement to say what I've just said, but it's actually when you drill down, and historically, we've always said, do you know what? Give us a year or two and we'll find a way. Well, this is my second term now, and I never saw that happen. So I'm
Still
now
looking
kind of
for it.
correct. I'm now thinking, do you know what? If we can't do it in the manner of extending to try to find those savings beyond, and don't forget, there was a group that was set up to focus on the tax savings, cuts, budgets, ideas, etc. That report was never executed and was never delivered in action. Possibly it will be looked at a bit now with our chief executive officer, but it was never actually fulfilled before the debate on the GST.
But I think it was in the Bailiwick Express today. You've taken on a whole load of additional staff, hundreds. How can you justify that, Chris? It just doesn't work, does it?
So, look, this is a really mixed bag. I am a huge sort of supporter of seeing some of the efficiency or the strength of our civil servants, the teams that work there, and of course, there's the core services. It's not just Brossard House and the administration team. It's every single sort of core service. Now, I would place a sort of a gamble that the majority of these numbers are also coming through on health. Now, we all know, you know, the constraints on health are, the figures are astronomical. We have an aging population, a demographic changing, reduced ETI income for the island, and yet the costs are just increasing. And if I just use a random example, an island like Jersey with GST or equivalent, they still haven't built their hospital, and it's huge amounts. So the idea that one day in the future we can look at our healthcare better, health costs better, possibly working more with Jersey and to share some of the services, but we're nowhere near that because we need all the parties to be involved. So costs are huge and only growing, and those staff come along. So unless there's a stronger resolve to actually bring the committee spends down, the cost down, and the efficiencies, this is why you're seeing this. So we can't let it continue.
But the thing is, Chris, we believe all that you say if we saw some action from the Revenue Services Department.
Yeah, well, I
I mean,
remember
that's a
there was
disgrace.
yeah. So not only are they behind, and I know this from a personal situation, they're still looking at sort of figures from 2 or 3 years. We brought in a new director, we read about, which was, I think, worked with another bank on the customer service. But we also did hear the words from the chief executive, Bonnie Smiley, saying that, look, it's going to work from the bottom up. Now, he does come with the pedigree in the sense that he worked with the post office and a proven success there.
Know
So
him well and rate him highly.
exactly likewise. But this beast is different. This beast has a lot more sort of moving pieces to it, and it takes time. So you are right. And when we talk about those savings of the 2.5 million, we get a clear message from the chief executive that this is what he's trying to do within the infrastructure of the government services, or at least the civil servants. But also, let's be frank. It's the committees, whether it be E&I or economic development, and all these ones, and of course, above all, I look at HSC and I look at ESS. These are the ones which have a necessary and very difficult job. If we took the approach of as businesses do, which we can't do, we're not three levers as a business, we're 21 plus levers.
Yeah.
But if we each take that responsibility seriously to break it down, and it would include other necessity. And quite frankly, I'm going to mention this, which is still maybe the early days, but it shouldn't be treated like this. But we should be using more the resources of AI. We should be implementing that at a greater level. The rest of the world is at the British Irish Assembly. They talk about the infrastructure resolve. So this is a huge piece that comes in to try to help us. We need to act differently, and we need to act with strength.
And if you use AI, presumably you can cut down staff numbers.
Okay, so that's always the inherent risk of these things. I remember in the 80s when there were the computer clubs, and then we were worried about Excel spreadsheets and Word and all the things there. The reality is new opportunities arise, new
Yeah,
jobs arise. And
yeah.
also remember, for every person who loses their work, let's say within the civil service, we are creating another person to work with the economy, and that economy will change. But I have a frustration that instead of the growth of the economy, with all these added costs to whether it be tax increases, increases on utilities because of a lack of spend previously on infrastructure, all these things, they're not kind of driving us to fight harder. They're putting us into a situation of where we start feeling more despair.
Chris, how do you feel about 15% corporation tax? Because that's going to happen fairly soon, isn't it, on an international basis? Now, I know the argument is that if you did that, you're going to lose a lot of the financial services businesses that are in the bailiwick. But having said that, if they go and relocate to somewhere else and still have to pay 15%, is that going to actually affect them?
Okay, so this is I presume we're referring also to Pillar Two.
Yeah.
Um, and for a start, the way that, for example, other jurisdictions treat it, they look at it as a future cost here. We've kind of made some presumptions on what they're going to be here. The latest news is, within the United States, there could be a sort of a holdback on that, and it could end up in an even trickier situation where they do not cooperate with enforcing, which was brought in January, enforcing it, and therefore businesses might go over there. But the key has always been this: is that you have to take any of these effects unilaterally. So including our neighbours of Jersey, but also sort of corresponding jurisdictions like Isle of Man, the aspects there. We all know, I don't think anyone would disagree with the corporate tax reforms in the sense that putting the onus onto the companies it's appreciated by the companies too, but the key area you're referring to is whether or not that business will depart from
Yeah.
Guernsey, move elsewhere. So as long as we sort of take an approach, and we do have parallel, as was stated in the assembly before last, a parallel line with the GST work preparation and the tax reform. But my concern always is we cannot guarantee on the pillar two.
If somebody's actually has anybody actually made any calculation as to how much that tax take could be?
Well, the most recent calculation, there was actually an increase in it. And there was some talk about some gaming company, because this is, in effect, it affects any company with above 750 million.
Yeah.
And that would have to be whatever location in the world they choose. Why not Guernsey? So the figures are ranging from 20 plus 40 million, etc. But as I said, it's very hard. I mean, look, as you know, I chair the offshore wind group.
Yeah.
And now we don't include that as part of the calculations of potential income. I understand why. You could say that, well, this is mid to long term, but I would like it. I still feel that the opportunity, not only for Guernsey, but for Alderney, for the territorial waters, to generate an income almost at sovereign wealth levels to create an income, should be treated as part of it. Because, in my opinion, whether or not, well, we have the pillar twos, is also the same constraints or same battles we have to actually achieve what the assembly has agreed for us to move on to phases 3 and 4. to achieve eventually the revenues from the wind farm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, but we are agreed that if Guernsey doesn't toe the line, they could be listed as a rogue state, which would be counterproductive, wouldn't it?
I agree. Maybe I wouldn't use the rogue state. I'll just say that if we're not in line, any sort of blue chip financial
Yeah.
organization is going to be where its best position is, and
But
therefore may not be Guernsey.
GST looks like it's going to happen. Um, why is it taking so long to actually debate the thing? I mean, you know, you make a decision, you do it in business, don't you? You know that.
Well, look, the extent resolution is there. It's been agreed. They say that it would be up to 2027. That is why in the penultimate states meeting, they spoke about this parallel line between tax reform and GST. Now, in any case, they've already worked out there would be a delay to implement it. I was, as you probably remember, but I was never a sort of a supporter of the GST. However, I believe that we need something. Everyone
Yeah,
understands that.
sure. Yeah.
I also believe on the growth. So if we have growth, efficiencies, and savings, I will agree that it will not be sufficient to replace the gap that's there. But without the control in spending the efficiency, we're not going to get the full support to do the rest. What's the point of ending up in a situation where we end up with these additional taxes on the people of the island. And I mean, if I could just add one thing, there was one area where I thought, you know what, it might be quite good if we are putting GST, let's say, onto business visitors, etc., etc. But that total figure came to less than 10 million. In fact, it was about 6 million something. That is not, to me, a considerable amount. And then when we start to analyze, as we're talking to the stakeholders, whether or not it's going to be on food or not, well, when we get to these decisions, these very difficult decisions, if we don't put it on everything like some people do, some jurisdictions have done, then we're just going to need to increase the rate higher. So be careful when it's kind of presented that we're not going to cover some basics, which makes it better for those now. What happens when it increases after? So we just have to focus on those efficiencies and savings. And now comes the budget, and that is our time to really look at how we do this.
Am I right in thinking that you're still going for a starter rate of 5% on the GST?
That was what was mentioned at the beginning. So I'm presuming that will remain there. And that's on the basis of certain items not being covered.
And how much of that is lost in administration, that 5%?
So there have been mixed figures there. There were some kind of extremely high figures, but there's going to be a cost implication of the million plus to do that. But look, reality check, and it goes back to your very first comment about revenue services. With 20 years experience, we're struggling to collect the revenues, and we're bringing in experts and teams there. So one thing that I feel that government is not always the best at. It's these sort of roles. If I kind of look back, I don't know, to the ports when the teams were smaller, if there was a problem on one side, they'd get together and talk about it and solve it.
Yeah.
Whereas now to have this structure of layered management layers and information across, that's the bit where those are efficiencies we could do. And almost, I don't go back to the old way of working, but that pragmatic way, let's fix the problem.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, the more people involved, the larger the debate and the longer it takes, isn't it? Really, from that point of view. Okay, get on now to your favourite, wind generation. How's it going? What's going to happen? Who's going to pay for it?
Right. Okay. Well, the paying has always come from the same pocket through the contracts for different CFDs and the bidders. So in effect, what we are doing now, we're now on phases 3 and 4. So the objective of this now is to have something by December 2026 where we can actually go to market and look at the preferred bidders. There are other factors that come in between. We have the potential potential change of UK government, sort of a lot of talk of reform. Now, reform, a bit like Trump, has got that the mentality of drill, baby, drill.
Yeah.
But no one can deny the fact that the increased requirements in energy are exponential now, and that's also due to AI, crypto, data centers, etc. So I feel that as time goes on, actually the reasoning behind it is stronger. However, I strongly feel as well is that we need to accelerate more on this project, and there are primarily the main blockages we have are what we need is primary legislation, and that will be through the UK, and that could be delayed to as far as 2030, because until then it means that we can continue doing our work, we can continue preparing, but it just puts a delay. But I personally believe the market is changing a lot. France is looking already at preparing another wind farm near us. We've already had one which has started nearly 2 years ago, and now they're looking at Roche Douve. Now, for me, that's another drive for us to work harder. And as you are on Alderney, Tony, I think also what's important is that we're working with Alderney as well, because Alderney has its territorial waters. We've got a slight different sort of structure of the ownership and the seabed. But this is a bailiwick project, let's say, and
Yeah.
it can be for all. But we have to have the primary focus to actually get the maximum return through this export of energy for the benefit of Guernsey.
The thing is, though, Chris, Alderney differs from you insofar as we own our seabed. Something went wrong in the past, and somehow Alderney ends up owning its seabed, whereas your is still owned by the Crown. Yeah.
Correct. Yes, it's an interesting, it's a really interesting point in question, because what we have is, yes, it's by the Crown, and His Majesty's Receiver General in Guernsey has that relationship with the Crown. So in effect, it's not it doesn't cause any particular risk for us, if anything, to a certain extent, because it's the Crown and the developers of global companies bidding. That there is a an agreement in place, which means that from His Majesty's Receiver General to the UK and back, the whole process goes on without any sort of loss of income or anything else. It's
Yeah.
more the it is, and again, different in Jersey.
But is that part of the reason you'd have to go through a UK legislation process to get it done?
So yes and no. So fundamentally, because we use the CFDs, which is the tool users can almost kind of guaranteeing the cost of energy, and it creates a sort of a series of events that, for example, when wind has been generated or not, etc. So the CFDs work for us best with the UK.
Yeah.
It doesn't work in the same way with Europe or France, which leads to Europe, obviously, from energy basis. So that is one of the stronger reasons which kind of which make it more favourable to work with the UK. And let's not forget, it's the UK's targets and requirements. So whether or not we see maybe, I don't know, a potential government like Reform Party taking power in the UK and looking at more of the gases, the oils, etc. Actually, from my perspective, that's all part of the frame. There's such a huge demand for energy. We can all fit
Yeah.
in that
There's got to
structure.
be a mix, hasn't there, for the year, for the years to come, as it were. Did anyone think about putting a tidal barrage across the Belgrave Bay? Because there's a hell of
Right?
a
Yeah.
lot of water in there every day, isn't there?
No, absolutely. So this is another area. So I mentioned earlier I was at the British Irish Assembly, and I met there with a couple of the UK MPs who are working with some technology called Anaconda, which is wave technology, the reef, which is exactly what you're talking about. Um, Now, the fundamental reason why, when we first explored this, and remember, this whole wind farm strategy was commenced by a group of deputies several years ago,
Yeah.
outside of electricity strategy, outside of economic development. It was very much a nucleus, an embryonic idea to study solar, wind, and tidal. With the Assembly's blessing and support, then it led into a subcommittee of policy and resources to delve and proceed with the research on the wind. And there's a strong reason for that as well, Tony, is because it's commercially viable, it's commercially proven at scale. At scale is the
Yeah.
key.
Yeah.
For the idle, it's not at scale. It's definitely grown there. So in my day-to-day job, I also keep a good eye out on the other technologies, and I share it. I share that information with others, and because that technology is going to change. I can't see an issue in the future. We may end up with our wind turbines and technology around it to benefit from the amazing tidal and sea movements we have.
Because they've got that sort of set up on the River Rance, haven't they, in France?
Yes,
And
that's
it's
right.
been there for ages.
Correct. But again, they're kind of building it across, in effect, almost a sort of an estuary side there. So the technology, such as the reef, does exactly that.
Yeah.
Now, if we were looking at lower megawatts, as in for the island, then that would be good. But in the same way, in the electricity strategy, we talked about 60, 65 megawatts. Now, to generate 65 megawatts, whether it be from marine, tidal, or wind, there's a huge cost for the infrastructure.
Yeah, sure.
So the
Yeah.
difference between getting the energy for Guernsey at 60 megawatts will cost us in the hundreds of millions. Um, Whereas the way we look at looking at the opportunity of exploiting the resources of the seabed, we're looking at in the billions, but at a ticket, the cost price paid by the developers, who then will be able to export that energy, and we will be the beneficiary of the income from that.
Yeah,
In other
so
words,
just to clarify this question, let's assume the wind farm gets underway and, a big international corporate company runs it. What do you get out of it? A license fee and tax on the income produced by workers?
okay, so that's spot on. So first of all, the revenue will be in effect somewhere between a shared arrangement on the energy transmission. What we're not doing, we're not getting involved in the day-to-day power generation up, power generation down. So we're looking in effect at the leasing of our resources for that, with the
Yeah,
benefit. And yes, you are right. There will be maintenance opportunities. If you look at our nearest neighbour wind farm, it's created great opportunities for the smaller towns around the sort of the French coast. Normal, just maybe small fishing towns, tourist towns, and then suddenly with the maintenance contracts. And also consider for Pillar Two, for example, there could be opportunities on the tax, because we're talking of an investment of around sort of £7 or £8 billion. Again, not Guernsey paying in there, but that will be when the tenders are achieved and won. Those are the sort of values of the investments that will go in to build it. Maintenance opportunities, corporate tax opportunities, jobs, potential jobs for apprenticeships and people going into the maintenance. We're talking of a 35-year commissioning and decommissioning life cycle.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of scope there. It's just really a question, isn't it, of getting people on board and proving you've got enough wind.
Yeah, well, the proving of the wind was proven when we had they had the net present value documentation with the last policy letter. It was done over 156 square kilometers. So it was a sample size, and it just gives you the value. So the proof is there. What we've got to do is extend that proof and also look at the consenting. We need the marine spatial survey plan to be done. There are all these factors, and again, don't forget, we don't only need these surveys for the wind farm. We need the surveys for our island, for conservation, for all the other necessities required. Looking at, I don't know, octopus sort of invasion, or but
Yeah,
it's all of the aspects that we need to monitor to get the best of
yeah,
our bailiwick.
yeah, yeah. It's going to be an interesting time, I think, and hopefully the Bailey will benefit from it. Chris, I'm sorry to have to say we've run out of time. So there are
Oh,
still a few questions left, which we'll have to do next time round, if they're
excellent.
still if they're still relevant. Chris, thank you so very much. As ever, really enjoyed chatting to you about things, and you do put it over in an understandable way, which is important.
No, thank you very much, Tony, and have a great day, sir.
Take care. Cheers.